She looked in a mirror, but the reflection, it wasn't hers. If you've ever felt a chill run down your spine when you're alone, if you've ever questioned what you see in the dark, then subscribe now, because some reflections never fade. It was just after midnight, the kind of quiet where every creak of the floorboards sounds like a footstep. Ilara stood in front of the antique mirror in her bedroom, the one that came with the house. The silvering was faded around the edges, like a dark, smoky vignette. She was just brushing her hair, the rhythmic strokes, a familiar, soothing motion. 100 strokes, just like her grandmother taught her. On the 99th stroke, she looked up, and the reflection smiled. A wide, knowing smile that stretched just a little too far. But Ilara was not smiling. Her own face was a mask of tired confusion. Her lips set in a firm, straight line. The brush fell from her hand, clattering loudly on the hardwood floor. The sound echoed in the stillness, but the smile in the mirror didn't waver. It just stayed there, fixed and terrifying, a silent mockery of her own shock. At first, the changes were so small, so fleeting, she thought she was imagining them. It started with a blink. She'd stare into the mirror, her eyes wide, and her reflection would blink slowly, deliberately, while her own eyes remained open. She'd chalk it up to a trick of the light, a sign she needed more sleep. Then came the single tear. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, she stood before the mirror, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, but her eyes were dry. In the reflection, however, a single, perfect teardrop traced a path down the cheek of her other self. It glistened for a moment before vanishing, and she felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Was she going crazy? Was the stress finally getting to her? She tried to ignore it, to avoid the mirror altogether. But it was like a magnet drawing her in. Soon, the small things weren't so small anymore. The reflection began to move on its own. It would tilt its head when hers was still. It would reach up and touch its hair when her hands were locked at her sides. It was no longer a reflection. It was an observer, a performer, and she was its only audience. The worst was when it would just stare, its eyes locked onto hers, its expression unreadable. It was like looking at a stranger wearing her face. The fear became a constant companion, a cold presence that clung to her like a second skin. It wasn't just the jump scares anymore, the sudden movements that made her heart leap into her throat. It was the quiet moments, the drawn-out seconds of silent observation that were the most unnerving. One night, she couldn't take it anymore. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the frantic drumming of her own heart. She stood before the mirror, her body trembling, her breath catching in her throat. She gathered every ounce of courage she had and whispered, her voice barely audible, "Who are you?" The sound was swallowed by the room, and for a moment there was nothing. Then a voice whispered back from the glass. It was her voice, but not. It was colder, smoother, with an echoey quality that seemed to come from a great distance. "I am you," it said, "but not the one you know." A wave of pure, undiluted terror washed over her. Her hands shook so violently she had to clench them into fists. But the reflection never stopped smiling. That placid, unsettling smile remained, its eyes holding hers, full of a chilling, ancient knowledge. One night, pushed to the edge of her sanity, Ilara decided she'd had enough. She wouldn't be a prisoner in her own home, haunted by her own face. In a fit of desperate rage, she grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a brass candlestick from her mantelpiece. With a scream that was part anger and part terror, she hurled it at the mirror. The sound of shattering glass was explosive, a final, violent punctuation, 2 weeks of silent torment. Shards rained down onto the floor, sparkling like a cruel kind of confetti in the dim light. Relief, sharp and immediate, flooded through her. It was over. She was free. Panting, she looked down at the wreckage, but her relief was short-lived. In every single shard, from the largest jagged piece to the tiniest splinter of glass, hundreds of them, thousands, all smiling that same terrible smile. And then, from one of the larger shards near her feet, a whisper rose, curling through the air like smoke. It was that same cold, familiar voice. "You cannot break what is already inside you." The words echoed in her mind, a horrifying truth that locked her in place. The horror wasn't in the mirror. The mirror was just a window. Now she looks in the mirror and sees someone else. Or maybe she sees herself for the very first time. The lines are blurred, the distinctions gone. Who is the reflection, and who is the person standing before the glass? They smile together now. They brush their hair in perfect sync. They move as one. She has accepted her other self, or perhaps her other self has consumed her. When you look in the mirror late at night, in the quiet of your own home, be careful. Look closely. Are you sure the person looking back is really you? Or is it someone else waiting patiently just behind the glass? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to look over your shoulder.